Welcome to Between the Bytes, weekly discussions on IT news, cybersecurity, and leadership. My name is Gary Arnold.
And I'm Derik Parkinson.
We have a very special guest today. We are excited to get this going. We would like to welcome Henry O'Connell from Canary Speech. Henry, how are you today?
I'm great. Very excited to be here with both of you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We'll see where the conversation takes us today. Again, it's kind of an exciting topic for me, as I've been teasing it out over the past few years, and we have a lot of exciting news these days, all related to AI. But before we jump in, Henry, I wanted to give you just a second to introduce yourself briefly to our audience, who you are, what you do. Go for it.
Thank you very much. So I'm Henry O'Connell. I'm the CEO and co-founder. My partner, Jeff Adams, and I, who have known each other for approximately 40 years, started Canary Speech, which is a AI speech biomarker company. We started about 6 years ago, and we focus on analyzing both healthcare and human conditions in speech.
Say, Henry, when I first heard about your company, I took pause and was like, wait a minute. Wow, what a cool thing. Using speech, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but using speech to help identify certain conditions or diseases that an individual might have.
That's true. And the concept has been around for about 20 years, and some very prominent universities, organizations have worked on it. MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Cambridge University, Arizona State, Florida State, to name just a few of them. Their work had been focused on utilizing the words we speak to identify and the depreciation of the use of those words and the complexity of language to identify cognitive illnesses and classic work done by MIT. When we looked at the work and the lack of practical solutions in healthcare, Jeff and I thought there's an opportunity to do some good here. Jeff has created, invented, commercialized natural language processing and built products for a company called, and led the technical staff, a company called Nuance, which was purchased by Microsoft about a year ago for $19 billion. They use natural language processing to process medical data, put it in the correct place, in the correct forms for hospitals. But Jeff also led the team that built the Amazon Echo, which is called Far-Field Speech. And in fact, when Amazon was looking to build the Echo, they simply bought the company that Jeff was in to acquire Jeff and his team. And they went on 3 years later and launched the Amazon Echo, which was the most successful speech product, AI product in the world. Nuance is the most successful product in the healthcare space. But there were no practical solutions to do what we're talking about doing. And Jeff and I looked at the space and looked at the development of technology and said, if this could be done, the implications to healthcare could be profound. The improvement in quality of life and the quality of care could be significant. So we decided we ought to do it.
Very cool.
Cool. I think we'll dive a little bit more into that, because I think you could learn about that all day as well, because that's just interesting in and of itself. But the subject at hand today that we wanted to cover with you, Henry, and give our audience a taste of it, because it is very much in the news, everyone's talking about it, it's all a buzz, is just AI in general. And so let's dive in. And I guess my first question and kind of the 101 starting place, when we say AI, artificial intelligence, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. How would you characterize or define AI?
Well, I would characterize it as the analysis of large data systems or databases or data information using machine learning in close to or in real time for decision making. If you capture a bunch of information, and I'm most familiar in the healthcare space, and you're talking with a patient, and the information you're gathering, under informed consent, of course, the information you're gathering is longitudinal, meaning I've talked to them a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, and I want to know, are there differences in the conversation that would lead me to help decision making with respect to the care of the patient. So let's say I was interested in a cardiac patient post-discharge. I spoke with them last week. I'm talking again with them this week. I want to know, are they progressing positively towards recovery? And while talking to them, I'm processing their vocal elements, their biomarkers in their speech, the sounds of their lungs, patterns of how they're talking to me. And I find that their sounds indicate a pulmonary tract infection. I would want an immediate alert to that because such an infection is detrimental to the recovery process and can, in fact, trigger a secondary heart problem. And if I could do that effectively, and the truth is I can, and alert the person, the clinical person who's speaking to them, to explore that, or even if the delta, the change in the pulmonary sounds are significant enough, to ask them to come in for a face-to-face appointment that would improve the quality of outcome for that patient, I'd want to be able to do that. We're processing 12.5 million data points a minute. We're doing that in milliseconds of time, and we're giving the clinical person information that can positively drive the outcome and is actionable information. That, to me, that's AI. That's the application of artificial processing towards an actionable piece of information that can drive positive outcomes for this individual.
What an awesome accomplishment. What an awesome direction to be taking AI. I feel like there's a lot of AI companies or just AI talk it's a little fluff, right? It's just, oh, it's cool. I can do this fun, cool thing, which is fun and cool, but a more concrete approach and a concrete, as you say, action from the data is really cool. How does, machine learning, you used that term, versus AI, help us understand what is machine learning as it relates to AI?
So if you think of AI as an outcome, and you could think of it in many different ways, but if you think of it as an outcome, artificial intelligence has to be driven in some way with information. Machine learning and data processing is, if you will, the counterpart to the neurons firing in our head. So we capture a piece of information and we process it in our neurons, but the actual action, the artificial intelligence that we're given, because this is now data-driven analysis that our mind has done. Well, artificial intelligence is backed up by the brain of machine learning. And that element drives actionable information, which allows us to take an informed action. So AI is really a combination of both the intelligence that I have, but that comes through the machine learning process and deep neural nets. So there's a combination of your deep neural net is processing stuff like your mind would. Not as well, not as fast, not as complexly, although we're constantly pushing that. So we're processing data and information just like our mind does. And in fact, in the example I gave, the clinical person, the nurse or the PA or the doctor, is listening to the patient for changes in pulmonary sounds. The reason AI and machine learning is good at that is, assume I'm talking to Mary on Monday and I speak with Mary on Thursday. And in between that time, the doctor or the clinician or the clinical team member has spoken to 150 other people. Their mind is cluttered with 150 people. The machine learning system isn't. It's only listening to Mary's voice, and it's doing a delta on the specific elements that relate to pulmonary sounds. And it comes back and it says, clinical team member, I see an elevated pulmonary sound. It gives them the opportunity to then specifically hone in on that and make a decision about bringing Mary in for an appointment rather than waiting to next week. And that action can be driven by data now that augments the observation that the clinical person's making. Independent of the clinical person, that information would still be there. An alert could be sent to the hospital, even if just Mary was talking to the AI team, and the AI then becomes a part of the team. So in that particular case, example, AI is a contributor to the actionable information that's objective about the outcome of this patient. All right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty neat addition, because that is, I'd imagine, where a big catch comes, especially when you talk with PAs and nurses and doctors, of course, who patient care and bedside manner, we'll say in a very plain way, is important. And when you get people with a very high EQ, and that is something they focus on, it can, speak very generally, but it can make it easier to get clouded, like you said, by 150 people throughout a day. Doesn't matter how amazing of a clinician you are, a long day is a long day for anybody. And like you said, if you're talking to Mary on Monday and she's the first patient, you're very attentive. If you're talking to Mary on Thursday, even if you're a fantastic clinician, if she's number 150, 170 of that for the end of your day, it's going to be tough to catch that kind of stuff. And I think that's a huge thing for AI to step in and just focus on, like you said, just the speech patterns and just alert them and kind of bring that clinician back in and say, okay, you know what, you're right. Now that I think about it a little bit more, I hear it too now, or I can focus on it a little bit more and put some more attention in this. So I think it adds a lot of support to that whole staff.
And particularly if you add to that this may be a post-discharge patient who no longer, they're at home. And so you're trying to ascertain changes over a video conference or a phone. And so it offers additional information to help, that's actionable in many cases, that helps augment the decision-making process. Yeah. That's what we're looking for. So going back, just to summarize, if you think of AI and deep neural nets and machine learning, the way I differentiate them, and I'm a biochemist, I'm not a PhD in machine learning, so forgive me if a technical, astute person would come in and change this, but for me personally, the application of artificial intelligence is backed up by deep neural nets and machine learning, which fundamentally, if you're drawing a correlation, that's the brains in the operation giving actionable information to a set of algorithms that are now making inferences towards decision making. So the two work in concert with each other.
Got it.
Yeah, I love that you made that comment. I want to pull on that a little bit, and this is going to be, my sci-fi loving brain maybe bringing this up, but you hear people get worried or maybe, start crying about like, well, is this AI, this algorithm becoming sentient, or is it, is it a real, conscious thing? And I think the way you've highlighted kind of, at least in this case, of course, is, well, no, it's just really an advanced input-output system. But what would you say, there was the case of, there was a Google engineer, last year, several months ago, that was convinced that the chatbot that he was working on was alive and was conscious of him. What would you say to that in terms of there's lots of applications of AI, and you've even related and commented that it's kind of like our brain. So should we worry that it's going to become conscious and start thinking on its own?
I don't think that way. I would not call what we're doing towards a sentient, ones and zeros, digital sentient being. I don't think in that way. I think of these as being tools that we use to augment the information we have for decision-making, ourselves for decision-making. For instance, when I was in college, handheld calculators didn't exist for the first 2 years, did not exist. And we were still using slide rulers. I'll be 70 this coming year. When they came into play, we did not think of them as artificial intelligence, although you could plug things into them and get numbers out faster than I could on my slide rule. I could get accurate numbers off my slide rule, but this was really cool, They were not intelligent beings or some type of sentient creature. Now, deep neural nets and machine learning capabilities that we have today have dwarfed those things, truly dwarfed them. However, they are functioning fundamentally in the same way. They're processing information. They have a range of different determinants, algorithmic determinants that branch down and say, this one's more likely, this one's more likely, all the way down to your branch. And in language, then, that identifies what you've asked it to, but you've given it basic information to say, I just said the word apple, or I said the word apple in a more emotional way than I would have otherwise. So maybe I'm talking about the company and not the fruit, or maybe in fact I'm talking about the fruit because I'm an apple lover, So we're able to specifically train to recognize changes in emotion. I'm anxious about something or I'm excited about something. And those things, our brain is doing that. You guys know without my telling you that I'm excited about the work I'm doing. I don't have to say to you, I'm excited about the work I'm doing. In fact, the word excitement probably comes from the fact that we could hear something and we decided we needed to term it. Or I'm sad, or I'm anxious, or I'm whatever. All of these emotional words didn't come up. I created a word for emotion or anxiety. Now I need to go see if I can make someone anxious because I have a concept of what anxiety is. I actually made the word anxiety because I heard anxiety in the voice of an individual. So we don't say these words to describe our emotions, but we know they're going on. So we're not just communicating the words that we speak, we're also communicating a whole range of things. What we try to do often is we try to develop AI to match what we're observing in the real world to be able to either duplicate the experts in that field or, like the example I gave, to deal with the barriers to doing so repetitively and accurately. And machine capabilities can provide us with that. But ultimately, I don't think they're sentient. I'm a real sci-fi lover, personally. So, but I don't think they're sentient.
I think we're on the same page there. And, who knows what the future holds, but as of today, as you said, it's data processing at its core is really all that it is. A really, really, really fancy calculator.
Very, very, very fancy calculators. And amazing came out.
You've hit on this theme several times, and it's come up in other conversations or things that I've seen around AI, in that one of the best case uses for AI is as a supplement or as an enhancement to what we as humans are already doing. A lot of people are worried about AI replacing their jobs. That's really come up a lot with the Chat GPT stuff, is that it's so good at writing, it's so good at coming up with whatever it may be. Copywriters are worried it's going to take their jobs, as well as, some other industries. Even marketers are like, well, is it going to just do it for us? But I think the reality is that it makes things that were repetitive easier or less repetitive. What are your thoughts on, again, the coupling of the use case really of AI more broadly speaking? Is it going to replace a lot of jobs? Should we be worried about that? What's going to happen there?
If I go back to an example in college, and college was 45 years ago for me, guys, I had to take a computer course in which you still had punch cards. So you had to type into a terminal and it would create a punch card. And one of my favorite poets of my life was Robert Frost. Going back to third grade, I can remember presenting a Robert Frost poem. He was the poet laureate of my age. He was appointed by John F. Kennedy to be so. And I created a database of Robert Frost poems, which you had to type in at the time, but they're relatively short compared to doing Agatha Christie's novels across 40 years, So type all those in and then randomly search that for patterns or for words, adjectives, pronouns, verbs, whatever, and then create a random new poem from Robert Frost. I can assure you that the new poem created by the computer based on Robert Frost patterns was crap. It was not two woods diverge in yellow wood, and sorry, I could not have taken both. It had the same meter, it had the same adjectives, it used the same database of language that he used, but it wasn't him. And while you can go to a McDonald's today and you can use a terminal to order your food, that kind of task is easy to duplicate with some accuracy. But I don't like sausage on my Egg McMuffin, and I'd like to have a folded egg. Now, you could put that in that terminal, but today you can't do that in that terminal. So if I'm going to order that, I have to go and get a person who can do it instantly without thought, can make those changes for me. And I get the meal that I want to eat rather than the meal that I won't eat. So there is going to be some intervention of AI into our job force, our workforce, and there will be some movement. In some cases, that will eliminate certain jobs, and in most cases, there'll be a counterpart creation of another job, which may be more interesting, may be more challenging, may be more creative for an individual to be part of. There will be an evolution. There's no question at all that people making slide rules went out of business. But there are a bunch of people making calculators that came into business. And one could argue that that was an entrance into the field of AI, artificial intelligence. I now had something that could do something that I could do with a slide rule manually that now could be better done with a simple calculator that had fundamental functionalities in it,
Great thoughts. Appreciate that. Before we move on to some of the other topics, I did want to ask just your general take, and it kind of relates to just my previous question on ChatGPT, OpenAI, DeepMind, Midjourney, all these names, these brands, I guess, that are coming out that are producing, whether it's written content or visual or audio or even, video content that is AI generated. What's your take on that, on its impact, its direction? Are you keeping up on it? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that there are certain fundamental things that can be created utilizing that, but they all have to have that fundamental input, which is in and of itself finite. I inputted a half a dozen poems from Robert Frost. If I inputted 50 poems instead of a half a dozen, the database from which variety, diversity could be created would be greater. But diversity is not the establishment of new creation. Diversity is the diversity of an existing database. So there's a difference. Creativity is not diversity with respect to the subject matter that we're talking about. So creativity comes from the ability of our own minds and the capacity that we have to do something that hasn't been done before. Simply creating diversity from an existing database creates variation of what has been done before. Creativity creates something that has never been done before. So will artificial intelligence get to that point? And the possibility is, of course, yes. But today we're already there. So there's a vast difference between the diversity from the database that exists to the creation of something that has never existed before. So we as human beings do the latter. And AI today is still doing the former. And there's a difference in that. Once we do the latter, then we can feed that back into the database and it's more clever, but it's still doing the diversity of the database, not the creation of new. And so there's a difference in that. Now, we use both to create the new. Will artificial intelligence move along to be able to do that? Maybe then we're in fact exploring that. And someone who knows more about this may say, oh, we're already there. And I might argue with them, no, we're not. It's a discussion. But right now, the differentiation for me is that.
Yeah.
That might be something that's, for lack of a better term, missed. People who are having this discussion or heated debate or online, just a full-on argument about AI and it taking jobs or replacing all of us, that gets left out is the pretty amazing ability for us as human beings to innovate and create and make things out of nothing. A lot of the mindsets, now looking back at some of the more heated debates or closed-minded arguments, is that the assumption is almost taken that everything is already in existence. There's nothing new that will come. There's no new fields. All the fields exist. All of the stories exist. All the movies exist. And that's kind of a mortal flaw in that argument of human beings. Even if it's out of sheer boredom, we will never stop creating and innovating and making new things. I mean, you look at your business partner. I would say that you took any one of those 3 steps that he took to get to, going into business with you and creating Canary Speech would be considered a pretty good life goal, where you could just kind of wash your hands and retire and call it a day. But it doesn't sound like either of you would enjoy that, just calling it good and resting on your laurels. It's a perfect example of, as mankind goes, we will never stop out creating anything that we create that can also come up with new ideas or remaster old ones. So that's a pretty cool point of view on that.
Henry, I want to ask you, as we on this podcast like to talk about all things IT and cybersecurity. So I did want to ask about the cybersecurity side of things, and in general, in your field, especially since it's medical data, but also just the AI in general. It's, as you've said, is only as good as its data. But data can be abused. Data can be collected in a less than above board way, we'll say. And I'm maybe pointing fingers at Facebook for starters. But in general, what are some of the big cybersecurity concerns when it comes to AI and its data?
Again, just giving an example, because we're in the trenches and not all the time.
Right.
From the beginning, we decided we wanted to make a difference in the clinical and the hospital marketplace. And in order to be a partner in that marketplace, we needed to be respectful and a contributor to data security. So be respectful of individuals' data, their personal and private rights associated with that, and their confidentiality surrounding it. So we decided from the very beginning that was the framework in which we were working. Other companies, in some of the social media companies, of course, that's not the framework in which they were working. In fact, they make their living off of the opposite of that. They sell information, and that's why they offer a platform that they call as free. The reality is nothing's free in this world, and nothing's free in our life. So the platforms aren't free. You're paying for it with your confidentiality, because you're giving it away. Everything you put on there can be sold. And although it's really amazing. I mean, all of us have been walking down an aisle where we've said, would you, to our wife, text me what we need to bring home. And all of a sudden I get an ad for it too. So I'm sorry, but although that's a little creepy, it's also amazing to me, So I just need to say, in its proper place, that's really amazing. What we did was we decided very, very basic stuff. I mean, if you're going to actually live in a situation where you're respectful of individuals and you're working with data that should be protected, you build your system from the very first line of code with that intent. We do that across a number of ways. Obviously, it isn't obvious, but all of the basic securities, what is called CIS, vulnerability penetration, SOC 2 type 2, high trust, all of those things have to be part of everything we do. We never take a piece of information from a partner that has an identity on it. So individuals' identities stay on one side of the wall, and the data we're processing is on the other side of the wall. And even to the extent that that information could come across by accident, we're scrubbing that before it gets to us, again, in milliseconds of time. We're scrubbing it. If they happen to say, marry my cousin, that gets scrubbed. Other personal identifiers get scrubbed. And you have to be respectful, informed consents, discussion about how this contributes to, in our case, your medical treatment, your medical record. All of those things and those handshakes have to be there. Regardless of where a company is providing services, they have to, in my opinion, they have to consider the endpoint, which is from the beginning to the endpoint. What is my responsibility to this information and data to the person I'm providing services to? In social media, that question is answered in a different way than it is in the markets that we're playing in. But again, you see what's happening and you ask yourself, is that infringing on my personal rights? If I believe it is, then we have a legitimate reason to ask them to make changes to how they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's refreshing to hear you say that, because I suspect you're more in the minority when it comes to the importance of how we treat data and the personal privacy and security. I don't think many, as you said, especially social media, but even just your run-of-the-mill companies don't take it as seriously as they should. And you guys are obviously taking it very seriously, which is great.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that very social media ad placement that you talk about up until Executech was exactly what my job was for about 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, amazing. I don't even know how it's done.
Yep.
It's amazing technology.
Yep.
Marketers are the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is another thing that when Gary first started wanting to talk about AI on this, is I always, up until very recently, learning about your company and with some of the other actual AI tools that are coming to market, anytime I heard AI, I always rolled my eyes, because marketers like Gary and I have kind of ruined that word for a little while, referring to anything from what might actually be AI to machine learning to just a chatbot on a website, and still having the audacity to call it AI. So it is always refreshing to meet and interact with companies that when they say AI and artificial intelligence, they actually mean artificial intelligence, not a fancy chatbot.
Well, and to some degree, when you think about a chatbot that's potentially using some mathematics where they have a differential engine, the person said yes or the person said no. So I'm going to go this way. They said yes, I'm going to go over here. For a calculator that could add 2 plus 2 to get to 4, and maybe even divide 4 by 2 to get to 2, but not do a derivative, I wouldn't call that AI. I would call it a differential engine.
Yep.
It's making, I recognize they said no, so I'm going down this channel. That's different than putting this through a deep neural net and doing a range of different calculations that our minds may be able to do, but most of us can't accomplish. I mean, it's true.
Exactly.
So,
yep. It's still just a series of if-then statements.
It is.
Essentially.
In early programming, that's exactly what it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I did write one before. I have written for a chatbot before. It's very tedious. So I could only imagine what it's like to program its big brother of an actual machine learning and AI engine. So no, I can tell you that's not for me.
And my total software experience was writing when that's all you could do. I mean, that's all you could do. I mean, that's all that the machine in front of you could understand. It was slightly better than, if even better. It probably wasn't as good, I'm sorry, as the calculators we have today. So we've progressed beyond that, and we should recognize that.
Yep.
And as we wrap up, and again, we could talk about AI all day. We could go down all kinds of rabbit holes, but we want to be respectful of your time. But I do want to, as we close out, get some of your thoughts as an experienced leader and as a leader of a company. Just in general, some best practices as a leader. What are your approaches when it comes to leadership for effective leadership and effective management?
In this area particularly, I said earlier in this meeting that I'm a biochemist. I'm not an expert in this field. I don't have a PhD in machine learning. Particularly leaders in this field, whether they have that degree or not and that expertise or not, You got to be listening to the people who are doing it. They're combining what they're doing with the experience that's associated with the execution of it too. A marketing person is coming in to talk with you about the impact it's having on the people that they're speaking with and the people communicating with the company. That has to be a component. We work with complex algorithms right now. That needs to be a component of that algorithm in the decision-making process for the company, which means the input of the people in the company that happen to be doing it in the trenches has to be the biggest component of the decision. And as a leader, you need to orchestrate the capacity of those elements to come together, as we do with algorithms, to come together for how you drive the decision-making in the company. It just has to be. We have a range of patents in our company, and our patent lawyers and our scientists contribute significantly to that. Our lawyers have PhDs in machine learning as well as experience in the field. So I come in as an individual with potentially the capacity to think out of the box, but not with the expertise that they have. So decision-making in that space is driven by a range of experiences and the reality that they have experience on a day-to-day basis that I just don't simply have. So good leadership in companies that are using AI has got to be driven by that kind of collaborative decision-making based on the experience and expertise, both, not one or the other, but both, of the people that are in the trenches.
I love that description because you've almost mirrored the description of how your machine learning and AI is functioning, is by taking many inputs, many data points, and synthesizing into a final decision. And so in leadership, it's much the same. You need to take multiple inputs and effectively synthesize those into an action item or a decision.
Yeah, you really do. Another funny example, which let me just mention it. I follow archaeology a lot. I enjoy it. I love it. I read a lot about it, and my son does too. And we have similar paths and also very different paths. And he's in his residency, medical student, and he's away now doing a residency for the first time in our life. We're not in the same geographic area, but we communicate using the tools that we have, text and email and so on. Archaeology is changing a lot now. Archaeology would find a bone, this big, and from that construct an entire dinosaur. And AI has been given that information. Okay, so here's the bone. And then tell me what the dinosaur looks like. And you get these dramatically different looking beasts than the archaeologists have come up with. And so because we're at the very top, the CEO, if you will, the archaeologist, if you will, the information available to them was limited to the point where the creature that they thought existed actually didn't. I followed, for instance, the literature on the Easter Island heads for years. For the last 25 years, I've followed that information. A number of British authors have speculated how the heads could be moved from 100 miles away to where they were and planted in the ground and so on, and teetered or rolled on non-existing round boards because lumber was very limited on the island. All of these papers, academic considerations. And about 5 years ago, someone had a little shovel and was digging around one of them and discovered that 2/3 of the Easter Island head was underground. All of those papers, all of them, were based on information that could have been debunked by a little garden tool, And so I look at that after 20 years plus of academic papers from very brilliant people, and they simply didn't take, if their gardener could have given them enough information to debunk everything they had written for 20 years. So it's so important that we're willing to listen to the voices that are around us. And those become an actual part of the decision process, not just yeah, I heard you, Fred, And I don't mean to defame Fred. I mean, I'm sure Fred is very valuable input. All right, so that's I just think that's important. And I think we're going to make better decisions. If we think machine learning and deep neural nets are going to make better decisions for us, we should follow a similar process.
Very well put. Great advice. Yeah, I love it. Henry, it's been great to have you on this podcast. It's been great to hear your thoughts and get a deeper look and a behind the scenes look a little bit of your industry and what you guys are working on. Again, it's incredible stuff. Really excited to see where it keeps going. As we close things out, are there any closing thoughts that you wanted to share, whether it's related to AI, whether it's related to leadership, how you got here? Any closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
The last 10 years have been amazing, as you know. Imagine if we had 4 Elon Musks around, building new cars, putting rockets into space, setting up a satellite network to provide people with internet that's far superior, possibly putting people on Mars. Imagine if we had 5 more of those people. I'm positive that on Earth, 5 more of those people exist. So imagine what the next 10 years will be like. I'm excited to look back 10 years from now and see where we are. The progression is wonderful. It's amazing. I just think, strap in. The ride is going to be wonderful.
Awesome. Onward and upward. Future's exciting.
Yep. Thanks, guys, very much.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. Henry, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. Be sure to check back next week for our ongoing episodes. Otherwise, we will see you all next time.
Thanks.
Yeah.